السلام عليكم. شكرا يا أخوان. There are a number of questions that came from the audience in the past. They have been compiled by Thomson Reuters. I would like to share those questions with you, and hopefully you will be able to share your wisdom and experience with the audience to address these questions. One question that came from the market: with aggressive competition in your native markets, in your own countries, how can Islamic banks continue to grow, in your opinion? Mr. Al-Omar.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. I believe, and thank you for your speech, but I want to restate some word about Islamic Bank. Islamic Bank has been there for the last 14 years and is driven by justice, by real growth in the economy, because they trade assets rather than banknotes. That's number one. Number two, the growth that we are seeing is not because of a cycle. It is due to more understanding. And I give you an example back to when I chaired Turkey, Kuwait Finance House Turkey in 2001. It was 24 branch. Today it's 270 branch. It was $480 million worth of total assets. Today is about $9 billion. Is more understanding. If you look at the Islamic banking, it's all driven to create value to the economy. And because any trade that you do, it goes to the GMB. Once you do that, you create jobs, you create incentive for people to expand their families' needs, and they will spend more, and then the industry will pick up. Now, what we are seeing today here is normally it's more understanding about Islamic banking. Now, whether we call it Islamic or in according to the Sharia, that's a different talks, because some of the banks, they don't trade words is Islamic or not. Now, do we see growth on Sharia acceptable banks? And I think yes, without doubt, Islam and trade was done throughout China and Europe for a long time. Now, we have to be in line with some of the requirements with the international economy and international requirements such as Basel 1, 2, 3 and IFRS and IOFIs. That's fine to give more credibility.
But if I were to say, you're absolutely right, but if I were to say that if we just grow with the growth of GDP, gross domestic product, because if you're part of the real economy, you're definitely part of GDP. You cannot be much bigger than life. The issue here is Islamic banks have been growing faster than GDP, faster than conventional banks. And the question here is, do you think in the future we will continue to grow in your own market at the same level, better than conventional banks and better than GDP?
What's the problem today with our depositors? That they are earning below their zakat payment. Now, does we see this as a part of the money supply? I think yes, because you need to spend your money on the real economy to create jobs for others. And God does not need more zakat from you, but God will promote you to spend those monies down.
Absolutely.
Now, if you tell me GDP or whatever the growth is 0.4, that does not make, not in line with Islamic banking.
If you allow, Mr. Hanif has something to say on this. Would you like to say something?
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulil Amin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. If you look at the experience of the Islamic banks in the Far East, what we have seen, the example you gave earlier, that 10, 12 to 20% who are pro-Islamic, they actually help drive the initial growth. And that has a compounded growth effect. So for example, Indonesia has a 2% market share for Islamic. If it grows to 4%, next year it's 100% growth. So it can't continue having 100% growth because ultimately it will eat up that affinity client base. The challenge is to attract the people who are sitting in the fence, who are indifferent. And that needs a further shift from form to form plus substance. And one of the challenges why we are stuck within the form ambit It's because for a long time, Islamic banks, in my analogy, is trying to play football in a rugby field. When we started Islamic banking, the rules that have been endowed on us were rules that were drafted for a rugby match. So we've been told you have to comply with the CAR standards, you have to comply with the deposit insurance scheme, you have to comply with your liquidity measures, and suddenly you find that you are not able to play according to your own rule book. So that effectively creates what I would like to call a character displacement. Yeah. And if you Google the word character displacement, it's a term that has been coined in ecology. What we have seen is that when two species compete for the same resources, Islamic banks and conventional banks are competing for the same resources. There is no Islamic money and conventional money. Like Abu Sulaiman was saying, there's only one form of mobilization. And when two species compete for the same resources, the dominant species will dictate the environment. And if the less dominant species cannot compete, they have to go through a character displacement.
I agree
and that's
with
what
you,
creates the synthetic products like Tawarruk.
But in that loyal customer segment, they're very impressed. That's good for you. But in that loyal customer segment, at some point, Islamic banks will reach saturation.
That's right.
And then the rest of the market, which is indifferent. In some markets, it's still, each market has a cycle of its own. We cannot, that's an aggregate cycle that we showed you. But maybe in Indonesia, it's still very early. But as you reach saturation in each market segment, these questions become much more important.
Absolutely.
Would you like to say something?
Very quickly, I can see the counter, the timing.
50 seconds.
Yeah, so 50 seconds. I'll try to wrap this up pretty quickly. I think if you just cut the Islamic banking population or population at large, and you're looking at what Tirat calls the people as Puritans, I don't want to call the large segment as indifferent segment. It's more moderate segment. It's a segment that is looking at value propositions. It's a segment that is actually looking at service at the core of everything. I think that's the segment that we would want to tap. Is Islamic banking market going to get saturated in years to come? We keep using analogies that we've, just tapped the tip of the iceberg and so on and so forth. It's a nascent industry. It's an industry which is 40 years old. So clearly, when we see growth, you are going to witness a double-digit growth. Within native markets like the UAE, we've seen a CAGR of 20%. Even through the crisis, we've looked at 12 to 15% growth within Islamic banking industry, which is faster than the conventional banks. But I think if we really need to make a key effect or impact on the market, it's going to be differentiating in nature rather than just banking on beliefs. Because Islamic banking, we can't bank on beliefs anymore.
We have run out of time.
You ate my time, Rafi, but next one.
Second question, I'm going to direct it to Al-Akh Hussein. Is marketing an Islamic identity a constraint on the universal appeal of the banking model? Universal appeal talks about the indifferent group. That's a question, and this comes from the audience.
If you look at the history of our industry, we've seen banks that call themselves Islamics. We've seen banks that did not use that brand. To me, there's nothing in the name. To me, it is the substance, actually, of what we can offer. This all still back to how different are we actually from the conventional banks. We are different in the essence of that we were born to be dealing with money, not in money, which means we have to look back to the basics of what we have been born for. I think to me, it's not semantics, it's not a name. You can be Islamics, you can be any name, as long as you deliver the substance or the reason for us, to
Mr.
exist.
Al-Omar, do you have any?
I've been involved with different client base, and I ask them in Turkey, especially, why you deal with us. We are more bureaucratics because we have to buy and sell. We just not grant banknotes. They said, you comfort our decisions. You comfort the way we do business, because if I want to buy a set of assets or cars, you buy it for your account, Therefore, you assess it on value and you comfort me as a decision making that my money on the spot is right. So I think we are not dealing with Islam as a trademark or as a marketing tools for us, but we do how we can do our contract with the justice on the contract, Sharia driven. And I've been challenged by clients, not in court, with our Sharia board. And if they say this is his right and this is your responsibility, I will honor that. So this is the way we do business.
But don't you think, and this is a question to Mr. Hanif, don't you think that, you know, when you say this is an Islamic bank and put it in the title, that you're telling the world that this is only for Muslims? And if you're a Muslim, please come in. If you're not a Muslim, you may not necessarily know quickly that you are welcome.
Our experience in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, where we have a multi-religious, multicultural society, the first impression is that Islamic finance or Islamic banking is only for Muslims. But once they get involved in the services of Islamic banking, we find that they are quite open, or rather agnostic, to whether it's Islamic or conventional. I'm talking about the segment, Muslims who are in the indifferent space and non-Muslims. So, for example, in our own branches, we have 26 branches in Malaysia, and more than half of the branches are manned. The managers are non-Muslims. And they are able to attract a substantial amount of non-Muslims to bank with us. And once they see that the products, the experience is very similar to conventional. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, the character displacement process had pushed us towards offering...
If HSBC was not called HSBC Amana, right, if it was called HSBC Islamic Banking, I think the question is clearer. As if it was called HSBC Islamic Bank, not HSBC Amana, what do you think the non-Muslims who are walking on the street looking for a bank, what do you think they would have said?
Well, the word HSBC
would they have come in?
Is just a brand name for Islamic banking services. So every product we offer has an Islamic banking term in it. So it's just, we didn't want to call just HSBC Islamic. Amana has certain brand identity, but eventually every customer who deals with HSBC Amana knows it's an Islamic banking product. So we didn't see having the word Islamic banking as something which is negative.
It's not an exclusive,
for
the Muslim community.
And today, anything that you connote Islamic seems to have a negative image. And I would like to think that Islamic banking can change the tide. Yeah. So at least people can say Islamic banking is something positive, is ethical. If David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain, can say positive things about Islamic banking, I think it's a good thing. Let's not drop the word Islamic from Islamic banking, because I think at least it shows there is some positive impact.
Hussein, do you have something to add?
No, I'd like to go back to the, you've mentioned the point of ethics. And Islamic banking is all about, concepts and principles of ethics. Ethics in one way, in the way that we are responsible. It's more socially responsible because I look at the transaction. I'm not driven by the profit. I'm not just seeking money to grow on base of numbers and interest, because I need to look at the transaction. I need to look that transaction is not harmful to the society. That transaction itself is done on the basis of, a solid project. If you look at a sukuk, I don't look at it in terms of, how much earning I will do as an institution. We look at the inside, how that operation will happen. And that's what makes us ethical and different, whether you call it Islamic or call it another name.
I think that's an excellent point, and it brings me to the second question. And the second question deals with what value propositions must be offered to customers to convince them to bank with an Islamic bank or Islamic banks in general. So, Dr. Adnan?
Sure. I think the value propositions that an Islamic bank should offer to customers to deal with them should be no different from any other bank in the world. Ethics is in the crux of Islamic banking. It's in our DNA. So in my opinion, you do not need to say that, we are an ethical bank, because ethics is the bare minimum, in Tirad, your own words, of Islamic banking. So if you really want, and Islamic banking is not for Muslims alone. If you look, the West is embracing Islamic banking. UK, as an example, wants to be alongside Malaysia, alongside Kuala Lumpur and Dubai, to become a capital of Islamic economy. So I think I feel very proud to be associated with an Islamic bank, and I think we should not even think of changing the nomenclature and let Islamic banking actually be a larger part of the global market and continue to be as a separate brand and continue to exist as an alternate form of banking, because that's perceived to be safer, more resilient, more stable, and has weathered the storm throughout the crisis. So in terms of what should we be offering, I think key differentiating factors.
If I may, there are two very prominent sources that confirm what you said. Christine Lagarde, who was the head of the IMF when she was a minister in France before she became the managing director of the IMF, said that Islamic banks have the solution. Also, the Pope in the Vatican, the one before this, said the same thing, and this is on Google, you can find it, all right? But these are highly educated, highly intelligent, highly placed individuals who know what we have. The public at large do not necessarily know the hidden jewels that banks have. And the question here is, how do you promote these values to attract people to do business with you, especially the indifferent group? It's a question of marketing, it's a question of positioning. Yes, we do know that ethics is the essence, but are we promoting it? I think the question was more, how do you position, not how do you change. You don't need to change, but are you positioning it right in terms of public and consumer awareness? I think the question was about that. Fadl.
I believe in the way we do business and to deliver safe and sound product. Like, for instance, on the liability side, when we receive a deposit, we need to let the depositor share our success. So therefore, by year end, if we accumulate better returns than the markets, if he put the deposit with a conventional or with others, so the price based on the performance, we need to make sure that we follow the Sharia, so we lower the risk, because it's a risk mitigant in doing business in according to Sharia. Where after on the subprime and the crisis, we finance assets. Those assets could come back, not a paper, not a position on FX or on the shares or whatever. So we need to continue to, as I said in the beginning of my speeches, people understanding us more, and we are understanding the way we do business. So
promote through action rather than advertising.
Can I add to that? You know, I think the part that we are not probably doing relies on a lot of what my colleagues are saying. Transparency is very important to us. Why I want to take transparency back to my customers, that depositors. All of us are depositors, all of us putting our money into a business. That is the Islamic bank. Now, should we know what happened to that money, how my money have been used to finance, and finance what? Did they finance socially responsible things? Now, I can do away with some profit as long as I feel good. There's people who pays more for organic food, more for responsible industries. And that's what our industry is not doing so far. We have to be clear, transparent, that the money that we take, the money that we lend, money can be good and can be harmful if it used wrongly. And that is the difference that an Islamic bank will deliver at the end.
You're also promoting action that shows the value. And I think these are very good points. Another question. What are the key challenges that the industry must address through innovation? And I'd like to ask Brother Hanif to address this.
Thank you. I mean, if you look at the Quranic injunction, which talks about, the Quran says, وَكُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا.
I cannot hear you, I'm sorry.
وَكُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا.
Yeah.
Of the bounties that Allah has created, consume things which are halal and tayyib. So if you look at the verse itself, it talks about halal and tayyib. Now, tayyib, by definition, has to be halal. I mean, I cannot see a subject matter which is tayyib but not halal. So to distinguish halal and tayyib means there are two levels. Like you mentioned earlier, there's a safety level and there's a service level. So the minimum is halal. The halal standard is the product itself. Tawarruk is permissible. But to ensure that the tawarruk is also tayyib requires the service level to comply with the ethical standards. So the challenges I find that needs to be managed or improved to innovation is to look at the incentive system. Today, if we incentivize our sales force by saying you'll get this much of variable compensation if you sell more tawarruk, your target is 10 million this month, now he's going to go out and may not sell the tayyib product because he wants to meet that 10 million target. Now, we need to change the incentive scheme whereby he is measured by the quality of the satisfaction of the customer.
Understood. In terms of, do you see a key challenge, this is the brother saying, do you see a key challenge out there that we need to overcome? And if so, what should we do in terms of innovation to overcome that challenge? Is there a key challenge? Maybe you don't see any challenges out there. Do you see a challenge out there?
Sorry, no, to me, the challenge is innovation probably is part of it. Innovation comes in the use of technology today. Innovation comes into the products. But I see the real challenges, whatever. I mean, technology can help us in all, probably, three challenges I see. One is differentiation. How different are we from?
No, but the challenge first. I mean, do you believe, as a challenge, do you see a challenge out there, like the indifferent group? Do you think it's a challenge to attract them? Maybe that's a challenge you think is important. Maybe you see a different challenge. So would you like to share with us the challenge you see out there, and how can innovation address that challenge?
I see us, to penetrate that particular market you talked about, we need three things. Differentiation, cost, and size. Differentiation, how do we set ourselves apart in terms of our products from conventional bank. Now, cost, we cannot continue to be costly because of our processes, because of the documentation process that we have today. We have to be able to cut the cost to a reasonable cost that our customer can offer, and size is very important for us to reach. I see these three challenges. Technology is a big help in the three areas.
I believe the challenge is the source of funding for the Islamic Bank for the next 10 years. Most of what we're doing is to affect the real economy. So it's either in the infrastructures or on constructions, or the source of funding is based on the deposits, 1 year and below. And if the market, as the initiative of Dubai and UAE is to establish sukuk markets and worldwide respected, and there will be a lot of trades there that will promote the funding, and this is a real challenge on the balance sheet.
That's a very good point. Dr. Adnan?
Very quickly, absolutely there are challenges.
Give me one important challenge in your mind.
The most important challenge in my mind is to attract is clearly around innovation. I think today customer needs have become very, very sophisticated. They are just not going to come to an Islamic bank because we are Islamic in nature, or we are Sharia compliant, or we are ethical. We need to make sure that they are customer need-based products rather than bank need-based products. So I think it's very important to understand that whatever is structured revolves around customer centricity. That would be the key challenge for Islamic banking growth, not just in native markets, but even outside.
I would like to add a challenge that yesterday was mentioned by the president of the IDB. He described that challenge in a request he gave to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. He said the climate that we live in has to be accommodating for Islamic banks. And he wants proactive engagement to make the climate more hospitable for Islamic banks. If I were to read between the lines, and I'm not very good at that, I always make mistakes, but
it's Basel III.
Let me speculate. Let me speculate with a statement. Maybe he says the regulatory regimes in many of the countries are not hospitable for Islamic banks. Islamic banks are treated as inferior to conventional banks. Not equal, inferior. And a case in point is, in many countries, the GCC is actually very good at that. They have been hospitable. But in many other countries, Islamic banks cannot deploy their liquidity at a profit. They end up keeping it idle because the central banks have not introduced regulations that permit Sharia compliant liquidity products.
They did not issue sukuk.
They don't issue sukuk
Servants.
or Islamic certificates of deposit or many things like that. So I think he's talking about the regulatory environment in Muslim countries, not in the UK today. They have issued a strategic initiative. In France, they have issued a strategic initiative. But I think the real challenge we have is that in our own natural markets, we do not have a hospitable environment. And to me, there is a big challenge. How do we overcome that is probably not the subject of this discussion. It requires too much time. This is a very important question, I believe. And it comes out from the challenges as well. What do you think the UAE government and other governments should do to facilitate Islamic finance? And I'd like this question to be addressed by Mr. Hussein first.
I mean, I agree with you. We need more friendlier regulatory environment. We need a regulatory environment that help, Islamic finance to flourish and to introduce its products to the community.
Dr. Adnan, with respect to Dubai, what do you think Dubai should do to facilitate the growth of Islamic finance?
I think we all here, Dubai is doing exactly the right thing that it should do.
Be more precise.
Which means to promote Islamic banking at a scale as large as this. But I think not just Dubai, we need to talk about UAE. I think we as Islamic banking practitioners within the country need a small task force to work very closely with the regulator in actually having a dialogue. And I was talking to Brother Hanif, they do this very well in Malaysia as well. There is a small body, a small task force that keeps talking to the regulator every now and then, just in order to bridge the gap and try to make the regulator understand that you need to come up with a separate set of regulations that govern Islamic banking, be it liquidity, be it risk management, or just funding.
Excellent. Brother Muhammad.
And with all respect of what my colleague says, I think UAE and particularly Dubai, there were initiative on the beginning to introduce sovereign risk sukuk for the Islamic banking, because it's very needed to the Islamic banks for liquidity management, to improve the balance sheet of banks. So I would like to see more sukuk coming out of UAE and or the GCC.
Excellent point. Brother Hanif.
Well, if you look at the example of Malaysia, we have gone through 3 cycles. Initially, it was a test and learn with one Islamic bank for first 10 years from 83 to 93. And from 93 onwards, we allowed windows, and now we have subsidiaries. And this is a stage where the central bank is trying to consolidate the various products and practices. So they're issuing a series of guidelines, around 12 or 13 guidelines, to define clearly how a tawarruk should be constructed, how should be operated or operationalized. So this is something that other central banks can emulate. And the other thing that we've always been talking about is how do we operationalize the ethical aspects. And as I had briefly mentioned earlier, the ethical aspects has a strong correlation with the way we compensate or incentivize our staff. If we take the conventional incentive model and apply on Islamic banks, my belief is that ethical aspiration will remain an aspiration because it conflicts with the compensation method that we put in place. So we need to see how we can regulate the compensation and incentive scheme to ensure that the ethical component is strongly correlated with the compensation. It's been done in other industries. If you look at in the IT industry, HP and others have come up with a model where the sales force are rewarded not based on number of printers they sell, right, or number of the amount of revenue they bring, but the level of customer satisfaction they're able to achieve. Yeah. Now, Islamic banks need to bring to the market that standard and ensure that the conventional banks also adopt the same standard. The Quran talks about Amru Ma'ruf and Nahil Munkar. We can't just close ourselves and look at Islamic banking without bringing up the standards.
Let me throw a curveball. In Qatar, the central bank issued a different regulation about a year ago or so and said, you have to choose. Either you are an Islamic bank or a conventional bank. You can't be both. And they wanted to simplify the market, I assume. And today in Qatar, Islamic banks can only compete with conventional banks on a true value proposition that differentiates them. Should this move, which was a move done by a regulator, should this move be considered? Remember the question. The question is, what should the government do? Yeah. And this question is addressed to Islamic banks. Do you think the move that took place in Qatar is something that should be considered here or studied or discussed?
It should be. Because if you look, someone just to introduce Islamic window for profits, I don't think he will be fair at the end of the road with the depositors. It will be biased for the shareholders. Now, if you introduce this window as a bank, as a unit, independent, with the paid up equity, that's because you believe on the way that they do business. Because if I take your argument is a cycle, and the cycle comes down, and then they will close it, and we saw some windows has been closed, and this is not the way to go forward with Islamic Bank.
Hussein, do you have an opinion on this?
You know, I'm not against windows as they are. But you know, I believe firmly that wholeheartedly Islamic banks can do a better job than a window. I agree with windows when I see windows as a way of transforming bank or evolving bank. We've seen this in the case of NCB, which started, you know, from branches into almost a whole, you know, Islamic.
But don't you think they have the best of both worlds? They have done windows for the retail. All the retail is Islamic. And when it came to the corporate world, they kept it conventional. Isn't that the best of both worlds?
You know, to me, I see an evolvement and moving. The market is moving them toward.
But that's a little unfair, don't you think? Can you have a conventional window in an Islamic bank?
No, I don't want to do that. But what I want to say something, just regarding, I don't see also the regulator as someone who decides what's the market. I see the regulator as someone who comes to regulate and organize the market. So I see it on us to make the move and the change. And the regulator is there to organize, to protect the market.
But I would like to suggest two things. Being a bit controversial, it's okay. I mean, I worked for an international conventional bank for 25 years. I would like to tell you how one can look at this. A, it's not a level playing field. The regulators are not hospitable with you as they are with conventional banks. The hospitality is a number of issues that you can address. You can specify. B, the competitive landscape is not fair. Conventional banks can have Islamic windows. You cannot have a conventional window. So how do you go from here? I don't think it's a level playing field. And I think it is our loyal customer base that has helped us all along. And the question was, what should the government do? Do you think they should think about this? I believe that's an important question. And I believe that we need to give this a bit more thought.
Just finally, do not let us engage regulatories into the equation here, because regulatories, they want to make sure they have a safe and sound banking sectors. And it's a red line for them. Now, if we come to, if it's not a pari passu with the conventional, because of the way we do business, I think in Kuwait we have some advantages of buying and selling real estate for our clients, where the conventional they don't have. Because in this way we buy and sell or lease back, we generate receivables. That's a different question. Now, the challenge is going ahead to improve the banking sectors for Islamic, I think, to improve the long-term funding for them.
I agree with you. That's another challenge. But I think we've used the time for this question. There is one more to go. Do you believe that Islamic banks will continue to grow faster than conventional banks? The question is, will they continue to grow faster, bigger, more than conventional banks? That is the question.
Yeah, I think so. Because after the subprime and the debt crisis, we see the multiplier effects is going back on the bank and shrinking balance sheet. Now, does we see Islamic banks having the same problem? No, because they don't use the multiplier effect. They take deposits and they book assets, and they don't place it on other banks and then they borrow from another bank. So plus that what we are delivering goes to the real economy. I think yes, we will do.
Look,
I think I agree with the chart you presented earlier. Once you reach a particular tipping point, the growth will saturate. Unless you're able to innovate and move from form to form and substance. And as I mentioned earlier, to shift to form and substance, the challenge is not to bring a level playing field between conventional and Islamic.
Are you saying you think we're about approaching the maturity stage?
Different countries have different stage.
But in some countries we are?
Yes.
Which countries do you think will
I would think, like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, you've reached a certain stage where I think you have already mobilized all the affinity clients. The non-affinity, those people who are sitting in the middle, may need to see that substance emerge.
That's very interesting.
Right? In Malaysia, we still have more scope to go. So I believe if you want to see the substance emerge, it's not bringing a level playing field between conventional and Islamic, it's to lift conventional to the same standard of ethics of Islamic. Now, we never think of it that way. We always think we must have the same level playing field as conventional. Why don't think the other way down? That bring conventional banking, if we say they have less ethical standards, then go out and articulate what are the ethical standards.
They're claiming that space right now. Conventional banks are now claiming the ethical banking space.
That's right.
And we continue to say it's already built in, we don't have to speak about it. Dr. Adnan.
Well, clearly in native markets, ounce of logic more than a pound of flesh, which means denominator is very small, so we will continue to grow faster than conventional banks.
You believe that?
Absolutely.
In all markets?
In native markets, within the UAE, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's very optimistic. Hussein?
No, I think there is a big room to grow. I will agree with Muhammad's point. Actually, we are not even using that opportunity to show ourselves that we are the right way of doing banking. I think we missed that point. But the market is still very big and a lot of it still untapped. So the growth.
So you still think we will grow more than the conventional banks?
I think so, definitely.
I think that's very good news. If I was an investor, I'll put my money in Islamic banks. So
you are running Islamic bank.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm paid to say what I'm saying. Well, I think that comes to the end of the questions that we received from the audience. But we would leave now some room, not a lot of room, for questions coming from the audience here right now. Are there any questions? Would you care to pass the mic to the gentleman over there? Can you stand up so that they see you, please?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I would like to ask, when Islamic banks will have their own regulatory and own way of doing business, other than following conventional banks' way, like having more direct equity than just financing, being engaged in real trade, will we ever see an umbrella regulatory different than the central banks?
Question is clear. Brother Muhammad, would you like to?
I think that's driven by jurisdictions that we work with. I mean, if I did not see two regulatories set and two bodies managing two different institutions on Islamic or non-Islamic on one country, but they have set of regulations which we are comply with, and I think this is how it's going forward to. Now, monetary policies is different from country to countries. They can have separate boxes for them.
Hanif?
Sorry.
Would you like to add? Because you work in a different market,
That's
and I
right.
think your perspective brings diversity here.
Yeah. If you look at resources, money being a resource, there's only one money in the system. You can't have two regulatory systems to manage financial intermediation. And I briefly mentioned that responsibility of Amr Ma'ruf and Nahi al-Munkar among Muslims. If we believe that there's Ma'ruf in our system and there's a Munkar in the other system, it's our responsibility to ensure that that system is uplifted to the Ma'ruf level. There will be only one regulator who will regulate according to the Islamic standards. You cannot have two regulators, one conventional, one Islamic, existing in one system, because as the Quran dictates, the Munkar will outweigh the Ma'ruf. So you need to have one system universal according to the Sharia standards.
Very good. Excellent. Actually, 30 years ago, if you talk to CEOs of Islamic banks, they would have said, we want a different regulator. And look at the dramatic change in mindset. Today, you have CEOs of very prominent banks saying, what we have is good, and we know how to operate within the current system, which is excellent. This is massive, massive progress in the industry itself. Any more questions? Can you please stand up, and so the microphone will go to you. Over here.
Yeah.
Bismillah. My name is Ahmed Adam from the US.
Still need to do this.
The first part of the question is so-called Islamic financing through the conventional system is nothing but, probably with all due respect to the expression, a foster child. We cannot have on our plate halal meat and pork and trying then to pick and choose. My question to you, really a strategic question, where when the Islamic banking truly comes out of the box to serve the growth of the Islamic economy, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises, through Murabaha and other programs?
We are out of the box. We finance SMEs and middle businesses, but you don't see it everywhere because the market is not there, the client. But anybody who wants to deal with Islamic banks, there is certain products for them. I mean, we can finance short terms and money, working capitals. If you want to establish a industrial zone, factories, so everything is just now is available. All products is there.
Excellent. I think we will wrap it up on the questions. There is a survey that was done by Reuters, and we would like to share with you the results of the survey. It's interesting because the survey, a bunch of questions were sent to you, to the delegates. About 300 responded, and the feedback we received from them will be put on display right now. Do I need a clicker for this?
Yes.
Yes, here. Is there really a difference between Islamic banks and conventional banks beyond documentation? Is there a difference? This question didn't come from thin air. A lot say out there that there is no difference, it's just documentation. Now, you, or 300 of you, have given this response. 67% believe there is a real difference, which is a vote of confidence in the Islamic banks that are giving a unique value proposition. This is not something that we did, this is something that you said. And that is a positive feedback that we thank you for. The next, I don't have a clicker here, so I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Yes, does the prefix Islamic, having Islamic as a label, like Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, if we were called Abu Dhabi International Bank instead of Islamic Bank, would that make a difference? The question, does it, can you please go back? Is this an issue? 56% said yes. It means it will not help us attract that indifferent group. Yes, it's an issue. But look at the next question. Should we change the name? And 61% said no. Don't change the name. Earlier they said, yeah, it's a barrier. It doesn't invite people in. You really have to go out of your way to explain. Yet, so, okay, can we change the name to help them come in and eat our food? And they said, no, no, no. Don't change the name. That's you, not us. Who said this? The next. if we are not called Islamic, what should the name be? Look at what they said. No, please stay called Islamic. Don't change. 60% said that. The 39% who said, okay, fine, if you don't want to call yourself Islamic, ethical finance is a choice.
Participate.
Socially responsible finance is a choice. Participation finance is a choice. And then other. No clue. But 60% would like the name to remain unchanged. That's your feedback. And we obviously have to listen to you at the end of the day. All right? Any more? Is that it? Finished. These questions will be sent to the same delegates that answered them. And we will get fresh answers from them after all that what you have seen today. And once the results are ready, we will publish them. You will all receive the same feedback. I think that's the end of the CEO's debate session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go down.